He thought it would be a short stop. Just coffee. Just a few minutes to breathe. A forgotten roadside cafe. A quiet road. A life he believed was far behind him. But when a small voice greeted him and tiny hands placed a cup on his table, something inside him froze. She was not a waiter. She was a child. Calm. Polite. Too responsible for her age. And the look in her eyes stirred a memory he had buried under years of success and ambition. He came to escape the noise of his world, but instead found a silence filled with questions. Who lets a child work here? Why does this place feel familiar? And why does his heart suddenly feel heavier than any boardroom decision he has ever made? He did not know it yet, but this one stop would rewrite everything. What began as hunger would turn into truth. What began as coincidence would become destiny. And the greatest success of his life would not be found in money but in a bond he never knew existed. Listen carefully. Some moments arrive quietly, but they change you forever. The road stretched endlessly ahead of him, quiet and empty, the kind of silence that makes thoughts louder instead of calmer. He had not planned this drive. It began as an ordinary workday, another meeting filled with voices he barely heard and decisions that no longer stirred anything inside him. Somewhere between answering a question and pretending to care, something broke. Not loudly. Just enough for him to stand up, leave the room, and keep walking until the world outside felt more real than the one he was winning. Hours passed without direction. No destination. Just movement. The fields beside the road blurred into a soft green haze, and memories he thought were buried began to surface without permission. A childhood road. A town he never returned to. A promise he once made to himself to never look back. Hunger finally forced him to slow down. His eyes caught a small building ahead, worn by time and weather. A roadside cafe stood alone, its windows fogged, its sign faded, as if it had been forgotten by everyone except the road itself. He almost drove past it. He always avoided places like this. Places that carried history. Places that asked questions. Yet his hands turned the wheel before his mind could argue. Inside, the air felt different. Warm. Still. No music. No chatter. Just sunlight slipping through dusty glass and the smell of coffee and something sweet. The room felt paused, like it was waiting for someone to arrive so it could breathe again. He sat by the window, loosening his collar, unaware that this simple choice would soon pull him into a truth he was never prepared to face. Then a soft voice spoke his direction. And everything he thought he knew about his life began to shift. The voice came again, closer this time, gentle but steady. He opened his eyes and felt his breath pause. Standing beside the table was a little girl, small enough that the edge of the table reached her chest. She wore an apron that was clearly too big, tied tight at the back, and held a notepad with both hands like it was something important. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and her eyes carried a calm that felt far older than her age. She asked what he would like, speaking carefully as if each word mattered. For a moment he forgot how to answer. His gaze drifted past her shoulder, searching for an adult, a parent, anyone who would explain why a child was standing where a waiter should be. The cafe remained silent. Empty tables. No movement behind the counter. He finally asked where everyone was. She smiled politely and explained that her mother was busy cooking. That she helped here every day. That this was normal. There was no sadness in her voice. No complaint. Just acceptance. Something tightened in his chest. As she wrote down his order, he noticed the way she stood straight, the careful way she listened, the way she nodded as if she had done this 1,000 times before. It unsettled him. Children were supposed to laugh loudly, spill things, get distracted. This child carried responsibility like it belonged to her. When she turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of her profile and felt a strange pull. A sense of familiarity he could not explain. It brushed against a memory he had locked away years ago. He told himself it was nothing. Just exhaustion. Just coincidence. But as the small kitchen door swung open and shut behind her, the silence grew heavier. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. He realized then that this stop was no accident. And that the child he had just met was somehow connected to a part of his life he believed was gone forever. Minutes passed, yet it felt like time had slowed its pace inside the cafe. He stared at the surface of the table, tracing faint scratches left by years of use, while his thoughts refused to settle. The little girl returned with a glass of water, placing it carefully in front of him, her hands steady, her focus complete. She smiled, a simple expression, but it stirred something deep and uncomfortable in his chest. As she turned away, he noticed it again. The shape of her eyes. The slight curve of her smile. It was not imagination anymore. It was recognition without a name. A memory without a place. His heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from a quiet sense of knowing he did not yet understand. He asked her how long the cafe had been open. She answered easily, explaining that it had always been here, that her mother worked very hard, that they did their best every day. She spoke with pride, not as a child repeating learned words, but as someone who had lived them. A sound came from the kitchen then. The scrape of a chair. The soft clatter of a pot being moved. He felt his breath catch. Something told him the next moment would change everything. He stood slowly, unsure why his legs felt weak. The kitchen door opened. A woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face showed surprise that quickly turned into stillness. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to fall quiet. No words came at first. Just recognition. Years collapsed into seconds. Regret rose like a wave he could not outrun. She said his name, barely louder than a breath. In that instant, the past he had abandoned was no longer behind him. It was standing right there, looking at him, waiting for an answer he had avoided for far too long. The woman did not move at first. She stood there as if the floor beneath her had shifted, one hand gripping the edge of the counter, the other pressed lightly against her side. Time stretched between them, filled with words that had waited years to be spoken and fears that had grown heavy in silence. He saw it in her eyes before she said anything. Strength. Weariness. A quiet kind of courage shaped by doing everything alone. She asked him why he was here. Not with anger. Not with accusation. Just a calm question that carried the weight of every unanswered letter and every night spent wondering. He tried to speak, but the truth felt too large for a single sentence. He told her he was lost. That he had been driving without knowing where he was going. That something had pulled him inside. Her gaze shifted then, just for a moment, toward the kitchen door. When she looked back at him, her voice softened. She told him the cafe was all she had. That life had not followed the path they once imagined, but it had still given her something precious. Something worth every sacrifice. The little girl appeared again, moving between them without sensing the storm that surrounded her. She placed a plate on the table and looked up, proud of her work. The woman smiled at her, a real smile, the kind born from love and protection. He watched that exchange and felt his chest tighten. In that moment he understood what he had missed. Not just years but moments like this. Quiet victories. Small hands reaching for reassurance. A life built not on ambition but on devotion. As the child returned to the kitchen, the woman finally spoke the truth he feared and longed for at the same time. She told him the girl was hers. And then she paused, letting the silence finish the sentence for her. His heart knew the rest before his mind could accept it. The truth settled between them like a quiet storm. He lowered himself into the chair, not because he wanted to sit, but because his legs no longer trusted him. The room felt smaller now, every sound sharper, every breath heavier. He looked toward the kitchen door, half expecting the little girl to appear again, half afraid that she would. The woman spoke softly, choosing her words with care. She told him she never planned to carry the weight alone, but life rarely asks permission. She had waited once, hoping he would call, hoping he would come back. When that hope faded, she chose strength instead. Not for herself, but for the child who gave her a reason to wake up every morning and keep going. He listened, unable to interrupt, because every sentence carried a truth he could not escape. He wanted to apologize, but apologies felt too small. He wanted to explain, but explanations sounded like excuses even in his own mind. All he could do was look at the worn cafe around him and realize that while he was building success elsewhere, something far more meaningful had been growing right here. The little girl returned, this time holding a tray with careful balance. She placed the food down and looked at him with a hopeful smile, asking if everything was all right. He nodded, forcing a smile of his own, while something inside him broke open. Her presence was gentle, unguarded, trusting. She did not know the truth yet, but she was already shaping it. As she walked away, humming softly, he felt a quiet promise form in his chest. Not a loud vow. Not a dramatic moment. Just a steady resolve. Whatever came next would not be about regret anymore. It would be about showing up. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the cafe, softening the edges of everything it touched. He stayed long after the plates were cleared, long after the road outside called him back to the life he once believed was all that mattered. For the first time in years he did not feel the urge to leave. He felt the need to stay. The little girl climbed onto the chair across from him, swinging her legs as she asked simple questions. Where he lived. What he liked to eat. Whether he knew how to fix things. He answered each one carefully, aware that every word was building something fragile and new. Her laughter filled the quiet space, and with each sound, a piece of his guarded heart softened. The woman watched from a distance, cautious but hopeful. She had learned not to expect promises. He understood that now. Instead of words, he offered time. Instead of explanations, he offered presence. He told her he wanted to know his daughter, not as a stranger, but as someone who would earn the right to stay. When it was time to leave, he stood by the door, feeling the weight of the moment. He knelt in front of the little girl and thanked her for the meal. She smiled and told him to come back soon. He promised he would, and this time the promise felt real. As he stepped outside, the road no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a path forward. He knew the future would take patience, honesty, and courage. But for the first time, success had a different meaning. He drove away with something he had never carried before.